Hi, everybody, and welcome to Channel Week, a week-long webcast series created to shed light on how B2B marketers are optimizing their channel programs. I'm Terry Moffat, the editor of Channel Market Report, and I'll be moderating today's session, Rethinking Channel Engagement. Hint, 80% of it happens in outside partner communities. Just in case you're joining us for the first time, the webinar series is being hosted by Channel Market Report and Demand Gen Report. These are sister online media publications presenting daily news, email newsletters, special reports, videos, original research, and a rich menu of additional resources. Channel Market Report covers the latest solutions, trends, and information vendors need to maximize their channel sales and partner marketing programs. Demand Gen Report focuses on the strategies, tactics, and measurements that are key to generating demand. To learn more, please join our collective community of 75,000 subscribers by signing up for our email newsletters at channelmarketreport.com and demandgenreport.com. You can also join our discussion groups on LinkedIn at Channel Marketer and Demand Gen Specialists. In addition to our publications, we're also the sponsor of some pretty significant events. Our next one coming up is the B2B Sales and Marketing Exchange, which was launched last year in August in Boston. Obviously, we've had to make some changes to the program due to the COVID pandemic. So the B2B Sales and Marketing Exchange online experience will be held October 26th to the 28th. By tapping into our digital roots and building upon nearly a decade of immersive, engaging, and educational live and virtual events, we'll be bringing to you, wherever you are, a top-notch program featuring leading industry experts and solution providers, one-to-one networking opportunities, and deep-dive educational seminars. You can learn more about this unique event and sign up for updates at b2bsalesmarketing.exchange. This year, we've partnered with Grubhub to provide free lunch to all of us during Channel Week. Each day during Channel Week, 50 lucky attendees will score a free meal. Please check your info box for a Grubhub welcome from corporate support at grubhub.com. The subject line is going to be set a password for your new Grubhub account. And be sure to use the credit before it expires 1 week from the date of the issue. Finally, today's presentation, we're using the On24 platform where you can access all of the information you need from the platform toolbar. During and after today's presentation, please follow along and share your thoughts and feedback on Twitter and LinkedIn using the hashtag Channel Week. You can tweet directly from the On24 platform using the widgets on the screen. We also encourage you to ask our presenters questions. You can do that by simply clicking on the Q&A widget. Today's presentation is slated to run about 25 to 35 minutes, and we're going to leave some extra time for questions after the presentation. The session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive an archive link to review or share with colleagues, and we certainly hope you'll do that. In addition to joining the conversation online and submitting your questions, we also welcome to let us know how we're doing so we can continue to improve our events. We put together a very brief survey that will automatically launch once this webinar session ends. Before signing off today, please take a few minutes to complete the questionnaire so we can serve you better in the future. Now let's get to our presentation. I'm really excited to have this speaker join us today. Jay McBain is one of the most visible and respected thought leaders in the global channel. Named to the top 40 under 40 by the Business Review, as well as numerous Channel Magazine top influencer lists, he is often sought out for industry guidance and future trends. He has spent his 26-year career in various executive channel sales, marketing, and strategy roles within IBM, Lenovo, and Channelize. Jay is the principal analyst for global channels, partnerships, and ecosystems at Forrester. He's one of the most at Forrester, which is one of the most influential global research and advisory firms in the world. Jay, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, at least virtually. And I'm going to have to update my, there's no such thing as a free lunch, because I just heard from you that there might be a chance of winning a free lunch. So this is a big difference, but really excited to join, talk about channel engagement. I get to wake up every morning thinking about all elements of the channel program. There's about 100 of them that we define. I think about the channel technology that sits underneath that. I think of all the processes and workflows that make it all work. I think about the people that lead these programs, as well as lead channels and alliances and ecosystems. When I put it all together, though, one of the things that I find missing in a lot of cases is this idea of how to best do channel engagement and what it means and how it all works. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit today. And before I do that, I'll frame it up. You know, in the global technology ecosystem, for example, 64% of every dollar flows through a channel. It goes through indirect channels. If you look at every industry, it's upwards of 75% of all business flows through channels. For many companies, it is the most important route to market, and it's a key foundational part of their go-to-market strategy. When I look at the technology channel, for example, the one thing that's changed the most is this explosion of companies that are coming in. And the technology channel, and we say that every company in every industry is becoming a tech company. On the back of that, every professional services company, every firm in every industry is becoming a technology services firm. So we know that there are hundreds of thousands of VARs, and you can see the numbers here in the middle, with managed service providers and telco agents. On the right, you may not know that 81% of accounting firms are now doing tech services. 78% of digital marketing agencies are now doing tech services, along with architects and lawyers, legal, all the way down the list. On the left, the new multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world has created phenomenal growth. Hundreds of thousands of consultants, aggregators, brokers. There's 175,000 software companies today, up from 10,000 just 10 years ago. And there's going to be 1 million of them 10 years from now. And then when you look at emerging tech, Internet of Things, blockchain, you look at AI and automation and drones and quantum computing, every one of the emerging tech, we're following over 800,000 companies right now in those areas. So that's a lot of people in this ecosystem and millions more coming in. So how do you engage in a channel that's exploding? That's kind of one of the key questions. If you look at the numbers in behind the scenes, businesses and governments around the world spend $3.6 trillion in tech, hardware, software, and services, and $2.26 trillion of that flows through the channel. 189 billion of that is now through managed services, which is one of the faster growing elements of that. But we know many of the tech categories, and many of these tech categories in COVID are dropping 16 to 17%, by the way. That being said, the majority of computer and telco and consulting and system integration also happens with the channel. So I wanted to unpack the trends and what it means, and then get back to that community idea in terms of best ways to engage. So first and foremost, we're going through a major change in terms of buyers. And you can look at the demand gen report, you can look at channel marketer report, you can look at all of these different, really important media enterprises to kind of go through and dissect what the psychology, the behavior, the journey, the demographics, all of the changing buyer. But let me sum it up simply by saying that the future B2B buyer will look a lot like a B2C buyer. And all the things that we do in our personal lives, the research that we do, the digital journeys that we're on, the things that COVID has done to accelerate that, is all quickly flowing into B2B. So last week, I posted on social work that McKinsey did with Forrester research. And they showed that there's been more movement to e-commerce marketplaces and web direct in the last 3 months than the last 10 years combined. So we're going through an acceleration of a lot of the forecasts that we made and the predictions we made around the new buyer. But I want to drill into this buying journey. Many companies in every industry now are going through this journey mapping exercise. Right from the first moment that your prospect or customer, senses a problem, and however they start that journey, whether by a Google search or asking a peer, whatever they do right from the beginning, understanding every moment along the journey. And as companies are doing this and looking at these moments, they're finding out that in over half the cases, they don't own the moment. It's one of their partners. And it may not be their transactional or dealer network. It is someone else out in the ecosystem that is producing ebooks or podcasts or webinars, or is writing on social media, or owns, a LinkedIn or Facebook group, or in the subreddit. Somewhere is influencing your buyer. There's an average of 5 of them early in the journey. But as we know more about the early digital journey, we know more about our ecosystems, and we see a gap in terms of the programs that we built over the past decades and what we need to do to not only build the channel of the future or the ecosystem of the future, but be able to engage at them at the appropriate level to make sure that we drive success. So to use a confusing word, trifurcation, we're seeing a lot of companies now go through and leaders within ecosystems and channels start to look at channel partnerships differently. And it's about time, because we're learning that the traditional map or the traditional journey that a partner goes on, I mentioned about 100 different elements, is pretty linear. You've got to design your channel and all the work that goes into that. You've got to recruit, onboard, educate, train, certify, incent and motivate and drive loyalty. You've got to sales enable. You've got to co-sell and co-market. You've got to be able to measure, monitor, and report on all of that. Underneath all of that, there's obviously a lot of details that go into a channel program. Even the minimum viable channel program, the MVCP, has many, many elements of this, probably 30 of them, to make an appropriate channel program. So how do you do that in a new world where there are different kinds of partners? I talked about millions of partners coming into the equation. What the best way to look at it is some of those partners are transacting partners that are coming in, but most of them are not. Actually, upwards of 80% of partners coming into the equation now, that customer journey, are non-transacting partners. So how you engage and how you actually develop your program from the entire linear program has to now be applied regardless of the partner type. So if I actually break it down, the customer journey, into 3 sections. One is the influence section. From that first time the customer or the prospect has a problem or senses that they need something, right through to vendor selection. There are new emerging models of channel partners that don't rely on resell revenue, that do earn their ability to influence the customer upfront. Alliances, affinity, affiliates, advocates, ambassadors, there's all kinds of new business models. But understanding that in a majority of cases, your company isn't in front of the buyer early in the journey, but one of your potential partners are. So when you talk about communities, or you talk about that initial Google search that customer does 81% of the time, the first 2 or 3 pages of Google results should all be considered as potential partners in your company, because they're influencing your very specific buyer earlier in the journey. The transactional channel we know a lot about. We've been developing programs for almost 40 years, gold, silver, bronze, and how to accelerate that. And then, because every company in every industry is converting their business model into more of a subscription model, into recurring revenue, that this consumption model changes everything. The transaction now just becomes the first 30 days with a client. Now you've got to focus on adoption of your product to drive renewals and retention. You've got to focus on integrations with other products to make sure that it's sticky, which drives retention and renewals. You've got to focus on upsell and cross-sell every 30 days forever. The customer journey now never ends, and therefore there's now a growing and important channel that is post-transaction. And in a lot of cases, the influence channel and the retention channel won't be the dealer or the agent or the reseller or the VAR that's in the transactional part of the equation. So looking and widening your aperture to other partner types and other people who are participating in every moment of your customer or prospect's journey now become part of your ecosystem. I want to give a couple of examples. Microsoft, which already has 355,000 transacting partners that they've had for over 3 decades, now have 7,500 new partners coming on every month. And 80% of these partners are non-transacting. They're not resellers or MSPs. They add different value to the customer, and they show up at different times in the customer journey. AWS has doubled their channel for 3 years in a row. They would have done it for a 4th year if it wasn't for COVID. So here's a company that has over 100,000 partners now, which will likely have about 1 million partners in 5 years. It's that size of ecosystem. Look at in the SaaS space, Salesforce did a bunch of work looking at their buyers. Could be a sales cloud, marketing cloud, customer success cloud, could be acquisitions like MuleSoft or SteelBrick or Tableau, their entire portfolio, and looking at their buyers, looking at the 5 people that influence them the most early in the journey, as well as those players post-transaction. And they came out and announced that they're going to recruit 250,000 new partners to double their business in the next 4 years. So here is a recruitment that's off the charts. The same day they announced that, they shut down their resale program. They want 100% of the revenue to go through the App Exchange, which is their marketplace. And they want the influence and retention channel to drive results for Salesforce. So here's a completely different mode of working with your ecosystem. And how you engage with partners that are non-transacting is different. But it can be programmatic, process-driven, and it has to be highly automated, self-service, and scalable, given the numbers that I've talked about. But now companies are starting to talk about their multiplier. For every dollar that Salesforce sells, the ecosystem earns $4.65. Today, that $4.65 comes at an average margin of 75%. So why would you spend a minute trying to resell a license at 20% when you could be spending that minute billing out at 75? That's the argument of why you don't want to be part of a resale program in a SaaS business. Google Cloud just announced their number as $5.32. And they do a great job of explaining inside that pie chart how much of that is professional services and what kinds of services. How much of that is technology, like software, ISVs, and hardware and other things. So these ecosystems are now driven based on a multiplier number. And if your firm hasn't done the work yet to figure out how much ecosystem or economic value you create, that's some work that you need to do, because that's how these future partners want to listen. This is the content and messaging they want to hear, is how they can be successful in your ecosystem. And that doesn't involve value add and adding 10% of value onto your product SKU as at the point of transaction. So number 3 is around these new channels. I put up the Venn diagram there with 16 different circles on it. There is different partners at each part of the journey, like I mentioned, the point before vendor selection, the point of transaction, and the point afterwards, that different partner types are participating. So it starts to look like a mesh ecosystem. And every single customer is different. There's 35 million possibilities of how those ecosystems are going to work, and who those 5 people are, could be trillions of permutations of how that all works. But what makes an ecosystem different than a channel? And what makes the engagement different is that the value equation is different. It's untethered to the financial transaction, which we talked about, but it's focused on intra-firm value creation. It's not 1 plus U plus 10% equals the solution. It's 1 plus 1 equals 3. How do both firms take advantage of each other and drive success in a exponential way? Number 2, it's the network effect. Taking advantage of, if you're one of those new 7,500 partners to Microsoft this month, there's a massive network there. Microsoft sells to every single business on the planet. It's impossible to run a business, I think, without some Microsoft technology somewhere buried underneath. So in that world, how do you take advantage of the Microsoft community and the overall Microsoft network or ecosystem? And vice versa. How does Microsoft take advantage of that niche player in a specific industry, in a specific geography, with a specific buyer type? And it goes both ways. And then number 3, it's innovation. So again, it's not a linear model of supply chain where you add value at every spot. It's now when you're looking together and putting together technology or putting together a solution, it's co-innovation. So being able to develop a product. I mentioned 175,000 software companies growing to 1 million. These are companies that are developing a certain workflow, a certain set of business logic that they can then go and lock in that IP. They can go get a URL from GoDaddy for $5, go get a logo from Fiverr for $5, set up a LinkedIn page, and by Monday, you're a product. By the way, it's much easier to be found in that early digital journey by a customer as a product than the millions of companies, services companies out there that are cutting and pasting each other's words on their websites. It's almost impossible for an algorithm in a search engine or a marketplace to differentiate on anything other than location. So given that world, it's much better to be one of the products in those 35 million permutations because that'll show up on page 1 every single time. Now, this new world of there is no single throat to choke, there is no trusted advisor. It's this idea of how you enable these multiple partners of multiple partner types and multiple values at what different parts of the journey and how it all comes together and how you can align and do that through to and with these sets of partners in the ecosystem. Different set of problems, different set of challenges in terms of how to set up a communication strategy, a marketing strategy, a through and to marketing strategy to these partners. I talked about every company becoming a tech company, moving to a subscription model. Well, Accenture just did a big piece of research that 76% of the world's CEOs think their current business model will be unrecognizable in 5 years. 76%. And ecosystems are the number one reason why. I always use this example out of industry of a forklift that's added Internet of Things device. It's now become a data company, a technology company. There's 1,000 data points per second that this forklift sends to construction companies, to builders, to architects, to really drive the building of bigger, better, faster, cheaper buildings. And it's less about the dealership network that this forklift set up, decades ago, and it's more about all of these new influencers. So they're the latest partner of Microsoft, of AWS, of Google, of Salesforce, and all the way down the list, Oracle and IBM and SAP, and their ecosystem looks much different. The transactional part of it will continue, and it'll be one element of an overall ecosystem. So this company looks more like Tesla today than it does a forklift company. And that's what's changing everything. So I build the channel software tech stack. There's 159 companies that sit below all of these different ecosystems, channels, alliances around the world. And obviously, to be able to transact and to be able to do those 100 things that we talked about, from, managing all of those pieces to the marketing, to the onboarding, to the incentives, the data, the finance, and obviously these new ecosystems, which was new for 2020, it's a multi-billion-dollar market. And it's only about 50% penetrated. So 2.1 billion today, 4.2 billion opportunity. It's growing by well into double digits, even during COVID. And the opportunity on top of that for services is about 3 or 4x. So this is a really large third stage in terms of sales and marketing. CRM being the first decade, marketing automation being the second decade, this being the third decade. Now let's get to the crunch, which is the influencing the influencer. If you've set up channel account managers, and if you've set up a system to basically manage a linear channel, that's going to break down in a world that your ecosystem will probably be 10 times the size. And where that'll break down is there's not this linear communication. There's not this ability to layer in both people and processes to set up an ongoing, person-to-person engagement. I mentioned a lot more of it's self-service. A lot more of it is digital than ever before at scale. But it's an interesting question when you go and look at your buyers. You look at the customers that you have, the prospects that you have, you start to inspect those early moments and what influence looks like and start to become an expert on the early digital journey. A lot of things jump out at you. One is the permutations. If you're in a larger company, there's a lot of different kinds of buyers. Lines of business, for example, make 65% of cloud decisions today, 2/3. And there's 12 different lines of business: marketing, sales, operations, finance. In many companies, the head of marketing spends more on technology than the head of IT. In industries, it's not just the 27 industries anymore: the finance, the insurance, the technology, the pharmaceuticals, government. It is 297 sub-industries. It's the mid-sized clinic with 50 doctors, not the small hospital, not the large dentist offices. It's very specific. Countries, states, provinces. If you target mid-sized clinics, it changes location to location. Your ability to succeed, both as a product and a service, is your knowledge of the local legislation, regulation, and nuances that come with that. The sector, size, and segment. Again, 50 doctors is different than a small hospital, different than a dentist office. Each sub-industry, each industry has their own nuances based on the size of customer and the sector that they're in. And then finally, just looking at technology, for example, there's 26 categories we look at and 200 subcategories. You might be focused on security. Well, underneath that, there's 7 layers of security. So multiplying that all together is this 35 million number. And as you're building out your particular heat map for the customers that you're trying to get at a very specific level, understanding from there who sits in the ecosystem, who should be in your partner set, becomes a really important equation. It is really answered in every case by 3 simple questions. Go to your customers, and again, you're spending a lot of time obsessed over that early journey. Get obsessed about what they read. There's 30 different ways to read. They might be reading channel marketer report, demand gen report. They're reading other things. They could be listening to different podcasts. They could be subscribing to different associations, being members, or sitting on the board. They could be in vendor communities, distributor communities. I talked about social media. They could be in one of 100 LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups, subreddits. There's all kinds of different influence around what people read. We all get 300 emails every morning. We all choose to maybe open 5 of them. It's interesting to know for your prospects at large, what are those 5 most common things that they click on? And who are the people behind the scenes? Before COVID, each industry, technology, for example, had 150 physical shows, which has now turned into 150 virtual shows. And we're just starting to make the movement back into some, CDC-approved physical social distance events in parking lots, but we're still a year away from returning. But where they go virtually is important to know. And then the most important question is who they follow. Every one of those 35 million niche markets, niche buyer markets, has a group of influencers around it. And this becomes the challenge for most companies, in that they focus so much inward on building the program, those 100 different things, on building a portal, on getting people in. In the technology industry, adoption is about 17%, meaning that you're losing 83% of active partners. They're just not coming. And the answer is they're engaged elsewhere. And by the way, that's totally okay. In the technology industry, there's 54 magazines that they might be reading. I have a list on my blog. There's 64 podcasts that they're listening to. I've got that list on my blog. 24 associations, obviously the vendor communities, I mentioned a few of them, distributor communities, thought leadership groups, 99 LinkedIn groups, 25 Facebook groups, really active subreddit, which is more active in some cases than other social media, 150 events. So understanding this in total, this is a pretty big industry. It's $3.6 trillion. So there's a lot of logos here. But if I'm selling to mid-sized clinics in the Northeast of the United States, there's going to be much less logos. But it's going to be really important to map it out and then to double click on each logo, because there's a scoring technique you can do. And this is where that 83% outside your firewall happens. There are people, super connectors. If you've read Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, there are people that are very important in terms of influencing that very particular market. And they'll do it through multiple vehicles, webinars and podcasts and ebooks and associations and keynotes. And the people that score the most, the people that show up underneath the most logos, earn the most points. So when I actually did the work for this industry, I came up with 5,000 people that were behind the podcast, were behind the associations, were behind on the front cover of these magazines. When I scored 5,000 people and added it up, I got to the top 100 once I sorted, because I knew the points. I knew exactly how they got those points. So the algorithm is pretty easy. If you're on the front cover of the biggest magazine, you get 8 points. If you keynote a huge show with thousands of people in Vegas, you get 8 points. If you do a road show in St. Louis with 100 people, you get 2 points. If you write a blog in kind of one of the industry sections, you might get 2 points. If you're big on social media and you run one of the big LinkedIn groups, hey, maybe you get 5 points. But it's whatever you determine. It's not perfect. But after you count thousands of things across 5,000 people, it averages out and you start to get a real feel for who the most influential people are. Your ability to influence the influencers to get to a certain market is much more successful than trying to go after the partners themselves, because there's too many. And there's many companies on this list, by the way, some of them right up top. Number one, which sold for $1.5 billion with really only a community play as a marketing strategy, and that was Datto. There's another one just down the list a bit, ConnectWise, which is number 5, which also sold for $1.5 billion. So a couple of billionaires were created here. They also had a huge community called IT Nation, still have, and it's their only route to market. So community marketing is creating unicorns by understanding who the influencers are and understanding how to do community marketing. If you go back to that Venn diagram and you want to get after managed service providers, there's 50,000 of them around the world. You can look at my chart on what they read and where they go. You can look here at the people they follow. And you can execute a community play and have 50,000 different companies understanding who you are, knowing enough to be dangerous, and then getting to the point of endorsement. And that's the real effort in terms of community marketing, is building relationships at this level as opposed to going and doing the traditional fishbowl recruiting that you might do at trade shows. You want to get to the people who are influencing the influencers and make sure they get to the point where they're endorsing you in the marketplace on their platform. Stop trying the field of dreams, build it and they will come. After 39 years, we have 17% adoption. If you think that's going to 27 or 37 or 47 in the next couple of months, it's not. Where the action is in the other 83%. Get them inside the emails they already open, inside the podcast they already listen to, inside the associations that they are members of, and get educated through. Look at their spheres of influence, not only for your partners, but for your customers as well. This idea of super connectors fascinates me. Every industry I look at, every geography I look at, the ability to create this community play is intern level work. It's surfing the web, it's collecting breadcrumbs, it's putting logos on a page and really deliver the results. Finally, marketplaces are growing substantially. I talked about the last 3 months has been bigger than the last 10 years combined. This has a big difference in terms of how you treat resell versus others through a marketplace. So how do you engage in these partners in a marketplace world where there might be 20 major winners? We know that 73% of these new buyers think this is really convenient. We've already proven it out through COVID that this is the way of the future, and what we were expecting in 2023 and 2025 is happening now. And some of these big numbers in B2B, it's 17%. That was by 2023. We're going to reach that probably next year. In B2C, it's 35%, and we've reached that now. And it didn't take 3 to 5 years. So it's looking at these marketplaces, looking at the communities wrapped around these major marketplaces. Think about Microsoft, AWS, and Google. Think about Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, Marketo, NetSuite. Think about more traditional IBM, SAP, Oracle. I mean, the 10 or the 20 are already there. Amazon, Alibaba, they're there. And understanding how you're going to work in those communities is critically important. And then there's hundreds, and there will be thousands of niche marketplaces. This happens to be one for a mid-sized clinic, to close the loop on that example. Distributors are going through a number of disruption. We're writing actually a big report on that right now. So a lot of things are changing in terms of what they sell, who they sell to, how they gain presence and relevance in these ecosystems and marketplaces, and just the permutations that they're going to have to serve up. Millions and millions of companies in and around these ecosystems. And again, distributors have spent time in a linear sense behind somebody else in a supply chain. In an ecosystem, every star is exposed, and distributors have to step out and sell their value to the client along with the partner and work in this multi-partner ecosystem world. So as I close off, really quick imperatives. So what we're learning around COVID and engagement, and we've learned a lot about what companies are doing wrong. So the things that have jumped out to us is around empathy, avoiding, kind of legal language and defensive language, and really thinking about your partners, thinking about your customers, and thinking about them in terms of the personal sense, safety, hygiene, health, their families, and making sure you're engaging at that level. Every partner is in a different situation. I'm in Florida, where we're in one of the epicenters of COVID. Partners here may be down by 80%. If you're a partner focused on hospitality and retail, you might be down by 80%. If you sell automation and RPA, robotic process automation, you might be up by 80%. It's very personal. Don't be tone deaf. It's all about context. You can't send out a broad email anymore. You can't send out a billboard ad or a Super Bowl ad. It's got to be highly personalized. We had a major airline in the middle of COVID that came and said, our mission is connecting the world. Well, every airport, and I think there's only 4 countries left that allows Americans right now. Kind of the wrong tone. We had a cruise ship while people were stranded around the world for months on cruise ships that sent out an email say, hey, maybe you should just bring a couple weeks of food in case you're quarantined. Not a great thing to say to people that are, somewhat scared and in an industry that's under pressure. So getting the right tone. Advertising. In a world that is highly personalized, it is very risky to talk and try to normalize everyone's in the same position, because they're just not. Having this reassuring tone, it's about safety, it's about hygiene, it's about health, it's about helping your customers where they are today, not with multi-million-dollar digital transformations, but very specific investments to help them survive, help them thrive, depending on where they are and who they are. Now, this is the time to relax some requirements. Let's not get into this rigid legal adherence to requirements and get to subsection 9, subparagraph 4 contract. This is the time to start maybe giving some refunds or waiving change fees and doing things, because the companies that lean in now get the benefit. And as we come out of COVID a year from now, these partners will recognize who had their back. This ability to do the network effect, this community effect. You could lead this in terms of all of the different elements of the supply chain and all the different people involved in the community to bring it all together, to build that network, to build the connections to help people in this new environment. Agile, meaning that you can't set a communication or marketing strategy today and forget it. You've got to look at it, get your damage report by the hour and make sure that you're nimble enough to change as quickly as you can. Always be listening and responding, again, highly personalized, but your long-term vision is your brand. And obviously this will come to pass. There will be a new future of work, but the North Star here around difficult decisions you need to make is around that longer vision, the forced, the horizon view instead of the here and now. And then the most important probably is the amount of channels that you talk to your partners, that you talk to your customers. You can have a great phone conversation. They come on your website and you're trying to sell them something by midnight, high pressure, doesn't work. They go to Facebook and somebody in your company's putting a big rant about masks. That doesn't work. Your chatbot is, inhuman, doesn't work. All these 12 different ways they might touch you across every touch point in your organization. You got to think about these with that same level of tone, the same level of empathy. So I want to thank you so much for listening, taking the time, and I'm going to pass it over to Terry.
Jay, thanks so much for that eye-opening presentation. You always give us lots of things to think about. I was curious about what's happening with the influencers and the role that they're playing in the whole sort of buyer's journey and demand generation. Will influencers be kind of held responsible, or will vendors lean on them more to identify prospects or get those messages out about their brands to get customers interested in what they're selling, and then have that transition down to the people who might actually be selling it or implementing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And influencers, it's really a tale of three cities. We all know about celebrity influence and where we're at really in the consumer world. And that's struggling for, paying somebody $1 million to put out an Instagram ad and trying to get the attribution in place and see some return on investment. It's moved really to micro influence, people with smaller, more active communities that they've built in the consumer world. In the B2B world, this is still growing because none of the 100 people that I showed on that chart that I flashed up pretty quickly are celebrities. None of them are, their last name is not Kardashian, and none of them accept, Instagram payments. So this idea, though, is they are inside all of those logos that we talked about. They're on the board of the associations, they're keynoting, they're running the podcasts, they're running these social groups. So they show up so many different times in terms of influence, but their world is not of a, perhaps an affiliate where you're going to pay them a nickel for every deal they get you, but their idea of a partnership where you can actually come together and get their endorsement in the conversation across those communities. So in managed services, for example, there's 31 different communities. And if you cover all 31, you will become a household name. And like I said, you could grow $1 billion business. So in the B2B space, it's micro industry-based influence with people who are technically not influencers. We're calling them super connectors because it's more of a influence and Rolodex play than it is kind of a social media play.
Thanks. That's interesting. I'm curious. for any company that is, has all of a sudden decided that they need to, build out their channel marketing support program, and they're making initial investments in building a team, and maybe they've started this process in the last 6 months, or maybe even 6 months before the pandemic set in. Should they take a breath and think a little bit about what they've been doing, and then take a look at a lot of what you've discussed here, because so much of it is just beginning to take shape?
Yeah, we're maybe in the first or second inning of a long baseball game here. We've seen some companies take leadership, what I call the trifurcated model. Companies will announce the program as build, sell, and service. So a few weeks ago, you may have noticed HP changed their transactional gold, silver, bronze program to now this trifurcated model. A day before, Google. A week before that, IBM. A week before that, SAP. So you're going to see, what turns into dozens, into hundreds, into thousands of vendors over the next 18 months come out with these broader ecosystem programs. And that's where to take a step back is look at again, your journey mapping, look at your customer, look at all the elements before the point of transaction, after the point of transaction, and start to figure out start to map out what your ecosystem needs to look like to be successful. It might not mean 250,000 new partners like Salesforce, but it could mean 10,000 new partners. And that for many companies would just be off the wall. And you wouldn't go hire a bunch of channel account managers, because guess what? You're not going to get new money from the CFO when you go tell them that you're going to bring on 10 times the new partners. You're going to get the same amount of money. So you're going to have to get creative in terms of how you spend the money in the transactional model and be able to spread it a little bit like peanut butter into the influence model, into the retention model, and be able to drive an ecosystem play to surround your customer, influence the influencers, and play a community play, which is much cheaper than a traditional play to go and make it all work.
Has this started to emerge as a differentiator for brands as they're talking to partners, or they're trying to woo partners who they think are going to be effective, agents for them, where they're talking about their influencer program and how they're building, brand awareness for them, and how they can also maybe support the partners themselves?
Yeah, I talked about the multiplier effect, and it's something, if I was a leader of a channel or an alliance program, I would get obsessed over this ecosystem value that my company generates. And whether it's $5 or whatever that number is, you want to get to a very detailed level. And you want to know the installation, implementation, integration, security, compliance, continuity, data, the 17 different services that people can make money at all through the chain. I want to know the margins that they're making in each one of those businesses. I want to know geographically which cities and which states and provinces and countries are growing the fastest. So I want this vibrant heat map, and I want to talk to my my partners in that vein. I want to be talking about the ecosystem value and where they should be building practices, building up their skills, building repeatable IP, perhaps even products like I talked about, and going to market differently with us than just trying to make 20% front end margin, maybe some MDF and volume rebates on the back end. That's going the wrong direction. We're moving away from that conversation. And if you're still looking to have that conversation, you're going to find the most innovative and forward-looking partners not reading and not clicking and not engaging with you because you're not speaking their language.
Interesting. All right. Well, Jay, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all of your insights with us this afternoon. I want to thank everybody else for joining us. If you do have any questions that we didn't get to today, we'll be forwarding them to Jay, and hopefully, Jay, you'll be able to get back to our attendees with some more information. That wraps up our first day of Channel Week. Tomorrow, we'll be back at noon with a presentation on how to leverage your partner network to create a show-stopping virtual event. Jay, again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all of our attendees for spending your afternoon with us. Have a great evening.